Normally, in the Vtuber community, most people start their debut by showing off a 2D Vtuber avatar, usually commissioned by a 2D artist and rigger. Then, if the Vtuber is shown to have success, they will move on to showcasing themselves in 3D through models with full motion body tracking to give them a presence in special events they may plan out, like VR chat meetups or concerts. If you have the time, money, and the perseverance, and you want to make your own 3D Vtuber model, there are a lot of Blender and Unity tutorials out there that talk about how to make the transition from 2D to 3D. But no one ever considers a situation wherein the reverse is the issue, removing one dimension the character that you play as. What are the steps necessary to transition from a 3D VTuber model to a 2D VTuber avatar? Before I start, you might be wondering how someone may end up in this situation. Is it much easier to start 2D than later on move on to .vrm files? Well, not always. Based on my experience, I see more publicly available 3D models to download for free than 2D PNG files. Just look at a site like Vroid Hub that is basically the equivalent of an app store for 3D models that can be used on apps like VCFace, Vroid, and VRChat. A site where you download 2D VTuber avatars just does not exist, for as close as my knowledge can tell me. So most of the time you are paying artists and riggers to make custom characters for you, which is the best value, not gonna lie, but it is not the most accessible way of getting into the VTubing community. Not to mention that if you want to make the avatar yourself, the most well-known 2D VTuber avatar creator that YouTube always makes tutorials about requires you to fork some money. There are free alternatives, which I will talk about in this video, but let's just say that I really needed to reach the bottom of my search results to find anything that can beat VTube Studio's price tag. Compared to going the 3D route, all publicly known programs needed to make one is all free. And as someone who started with a 3D model, I just want to clear the confusion. No, you do not need a full motion tracking suit or some VR headset to move my .vrm file. If you're only planning to sit in the corner while you play games, a face cam will do just fine. So is starting with a 3D VTuber model easier than starting 2D? Well, it's debatable and really depends on your situation. For me, the reason why I started in 3D was because I had confidence and experience in making 3D models, but my 2D digital art skills needed some refinement. So I started out as a wizard, made up of thousands of polygons that can eat up the entire RAM of my computer. But I wanted to commit to the 2D look of my character. As much as I create toon-shaded Blender art on this channel, I have to admit there is still a liveliness and charm to seeing something drawn in ink and paper. Plus, 3D VTubers slowly kill your computer, especially when you plan to do a Blender stream alongside your face tracking. So I researched on how I can get started with creating my first ever 2D avatar. And this is what I made. Me, a wizard fully optimized for my own live streams that I'll be using in the foreseeable future. This is the original 3D model, and this is the final 2D.inp file in full motion. I was so happy with the result that I figured I should share my results to the public, because not only did a small video of mine called The Art of 3D VTubers gain some attention, I also wanted to share my findings with people who may have encountered the same situation as me, wherein you start 3D but you want to turn yourself into a moving PNG image with lots of layers that is the common standard for the industry. So let me explain how I got here by making one from scratch. You will need a 3D model, so I'll be taking one I created months ago called Dewey Sprite Heart. It's going to be a long video, so sit back as I explain to you the transition from making 3D to 2D VTubers for dummies like me. Yeah, so about what I'll be saying in this video, I can't really be honest with what I say without mentioning that I've only made 2 proper 2D characters at this point, and 6 failed drafts of the same character that look ugly as heck. I hastily skimmed through a lot of tutorials like how someone new to Blender might do when they see the download tutorial on YouTube, so my understanding of 2D rigging is probably subpar at most, but the results after so many trials and tests in Inochi and Krita were at a standard that I deem satisfactory for someone like me. So if you're an expert rigger looking for something new or profound in your YouTube home screen to help you in your commission work, this is probably not the video for you. I mean, come on, do you see any anime eyes on me? But if you want something, anything, to get you started from turning your default Vroid anime girl model into something more unique, well, do I have just the plan for you. At first, I figured I should probably start from scratch. I'm going to be using Krita as my main art program, but Photoshop will also do just fine. Anything other than that is up to debate because Inochi only supports a few file formats when it comes to importing your character into its program, and these two are the only ones that can produce the supported file formats, which is .psd and .cra. I opened up a new Krita document and drew my first ever layers. It freaking sucked. Did I mention how bad I was at drawing? Yeah, we're going to see monsters in this video. I always had a problem with drawing stuff in accurate proportion at different angles, even if the character that I am drawing is basically standing straight, so I usually get this, this, and this. Ew. But from the very start, there are some important things I learned. First, make sure that hidden parts of your layers still look complete, even if they're not being seen in the raw art program that you're using. Whenever you move the head and body of your finished Vtuber avatar, you'll eventually want to reveal what is inside the sleeve or what is at the back of its back. So, draw those parts in full detail. Also, use the mirror tool. The mirror tool is your friend to make sure an arm's length is the same as that of the other, so use that as well. You may have to disable it sometimes to draw asymmetrical parts of your avatar like the positioning of a hat, but for the most part, keep it on. My first attempts in making my wizard model were just children's doodles that may end up at a landfill somewhere when they finally hit 21, and I finally understand after so many attempts why it sucked. I was treating everything like I was a digital 2D artist. Tutorials will tell you to block out the character first before refining them into a more complex shape. Then you estimate based on random references online what hidden layers you should actually draw or not. I followed these steps for a while, only to realize, wait, I am a 3D artist. Not to mention a 3D artist that focuses on cartoon-looking characters than anime ones. If you are going to make a wizard with a comically large hat, or a girl most likely to be the face of some soda brand, I need to rewrite the steps, and do it my way. Find references and block out the character? No. We make our own references. Since I already have a model ready, I rented out images of Dewey facing multiple angles in Blender. At the very least, what we need is her facing up, down, left, right, and straight forward. These are the minimum amount of keyframes we will create when we start making her head angle parameter in Inochi, but let's worry about that later. We need to make her layers first on Krita. I import her facing straight forward into our project, and this will be the actual reference we'll be using to make her character come to life in 2 dimensions. I place the reference on the very center, then use the color picker to pick the colors I'll be using to paint over the reference. I guess it's tracing technically, but it's only bad if you're tracing over someone's art and calling the finished piece your own. I am using my own created 3D model for this one, so I'm not being unethical here. But if you're going to do this, I assume that you already have full ownership of the model that you're creating, given that I am naming this video the transition from making 3D to 2D VTubers. But if not, you may need to ask permission from the original artist and rigger and credit them if they decide to be known to the public. Again, we'll be using a lot of layers, so I painted each major body part and separated them into multiple layers. I don't really have a lot of insightful things for this process, but even with the references that I had, I still don't have a clear idea of the many layers I would have to paint. I will be jumping from looking at the references and identifying the many sides I haven't painted yet on one window, then going back to Krita to paint the sides, only to second guess myself and look at my references one more time. It's most likely you will not paint all the layers you need on your first try, but here are some tips to make your avatar look good before you start setting this up in Inochi. If you have layers that should be above of another layer in one angle, but disappear behind the same layer at another angle, you probably need to make one layer a mask, just as seen in the relationship of this hair and head layer. By putting them in the same group layer, with the head layer placed below, you can click this icon on the very right of the hair layer. Then every part of the hair that's directly above a transparent spot of the head layer completely disappears. Now when I rotate the head, it seems like the hair can be behind and above the head layer at the same time. It's probably common knowledge for anyone who has done digital painting before, but I have to confess that after nearly 8 years of using so many art programs, I've only come to realize the potential of masks. Symmetrical features should be kept at different layers. Don't be lazy like me during my first time, thinking that editing the mesh in Inochi can solve your problem. The same goes for eyes. Notice in my references that eyes get a little bit nearer to each other when facing the left and right angles, so keep them at different layers. As for your first model, it is best to focus more on adding layers to your head and upper torso region of your model. I find the layering process much easier if a character has its feet in place while letting its back and hips do the moving. My own model, for example, only had 4 static layers comprising the lower half, and I barely change anything to it, even when we move to the Inochi phase of development. It is what is least likely to be seen on stream after all, so having a disproportionate number of layers between the upper and lower half of your model should be fine, unless you're too much of a perfectionist. Consider the shadows of your model. Shadows don't always appear visible at all angles, so you may have to put them in separate layers if you need to. Avoid, for the most part, making outlines. Thin ones especially. If you are inexperienced like me at the start, you would notice that lines tend to expand and shrink to the ugliest of quality when you start to deform it in Inochi. This is why when you make mouths like mine, draw it open. When you draw it closed and you try to open it using the vertices in Inochi, you get a gooey looking line that does not look pleasant to the eye. But I suggest you follow this rule, like how a 3D artist recommends that you avoid making triangular faces in your model. There's definitely a way to make it work, but you really need to build your skill and knowledge in the craft first before making a perfect example of such an exemption. Make your canvas resolution bigger. I don't know why this is the case, but there seems to be some sort of compression issue happening whenever you open your save file into Inochi. So to combat that situation, I suggest increasing your project's resolution. The canvas I use is 3508 by 4960 pixels with 300 resolution per inch. But you guys can increase or decrease these numbers if your computer can or cannot handle 4K images. Any hidden layers you think you need? Look at the references one more time, especially the ones looking at different angles. When making the hair, I noticed that when she looks down, there is a top side that gets obscured when she looks straight up. So I painted that behind the layer with these hair bubble thingamajigs. I'll worry about how it looks in Inochi. Again, I have to admit that drawing is not my strongest talent, so you probably have to take my advice here with a grain of salt. I'm just sharing the way I did it, which I find easy in my part, but I understand that not everyone will have the same limitation and may actually have something to say about my dumb idiot mind. So, if you have better ways of making Kumar bait or workarounds to the problems that I mentioned in this video, be sure to leave a comment down below. With that being said, be sure to save your document and you're done with step 1. Once I was crudely finished, I needed to install a rigging program to set up and convert my Krita document into an avatar that can be face tracked. The most well-known one was Live 2D, but the price tag really scared my empty wallet. Sure, there's a free version, but the limitations seen in this comparison table between the free and pro version made me think that I may not be able to use the program to its fullest potential to make my doodle come to life. So I looked for alternatives, and what I found was a free program called Inochi Creator. YouTube tutorials marketed it as the free alternative to Live 2D, but I was disappointed at first when I clicked the download link provided in the description. It took me to the official site, but came to be that Inochi was not free, or at the very least, not free anymore. Keep in mind that most of these tutorials were published at least 6 months ago, so they're probably talking about outdated information by the time I finally viewed them. But I did not erase the fact that at some point, Inochi turned into a paid program, which means that I still do not have a program to make 2D Vtuber Avatars. So I tried to find ways to bypass the problem I had, and this is what I found. Inochi was actually free, but you do not download it on their official site. No. You had to download it on GitHub. I had to double check to make sure that this was actually legit. And the more I looked into it, the more that I can confirm that, yeah, this is an official free version of the $9 program published by the developers themselves. The only problem was that this is inside GitHub. And if you ever open a GitHub page, you would know that they have some of the shittiest user interfaces for downloading programs. The page consists of a file explorer filled with files that are a mystery to me, and for minutes I tried to look for the right file to download, only to realize that the correct zip file is located at the very bottom of the page in blue but small text. GitHub, please organize your site. I opened up the program. It was the same exact one mentioned in the tutorials. The only thing different was that every time you open the software, a message will appear telling you to donate to their site to support development for this program. The message will give you the option to close it after 10 seconds. Then you have access to this free, complex, but creative program. Now it's time to import your avatar. Take note that I was using Krita to make my avatar, so the files that I'll be importing here is a .cra document, which is the default file format whenever you save a project there. But if you're using Photoshop, you'll instead be importing your .psd file into the program. Once that's done, you probably need to make sure that all layers are ordered correctly from top to bottom in case you screwed something up while arranging your layers in Krita. Unlike 2D art programs, their hierarchy in the outliner does not determine whether they are in front or behind a certain layer. To change the order of a layer, go to the Node section of your software and click on the layer you want to change. The Inspector section will now give you values that you can view or change, like its positioning on the X or Y axis, its rotation, and scale, but underneath is this thing called sorting number. Each layer in your project is assigned a sorting number, and basically how it works is that the greater the sorting number is, the more it will appear at the back of a layer with a lower sorting number. So to bring something more to the front, you just need to lessen the sorting number, while to do the opposite is to increase the sorting number. Also, masks do not transfer from your art program to Inochi Creator, so I need to set it up again. Select the node that you want to be masked, go to the very bottom until you see this node that says mask sources. Go through your list of nodes and left click and drag your supposed mask to the mask source box of what you want to be masked, and you're done. The layer will only appear in front of non-transparent areas of your mask layer. Once everything is fixed, we will be creating our first parameter, the eye blink. Parameters are basically just like shape keys in Blender. They are what will give your model movement by assigning keyframes or access points with a value range of 0 to 1 or -1 to 1, depending on what works best for you. Then automatically filling in the in-betweens based upon the positioning and shape of your layers from one access point to the next. This probably won't make sense without looking at the future steps ahead of us, so let me demonstrate what I mean by creating the eye blink parameter. To make the eye blink parameter, go to the parameters section of Inochi. If you don't see this window or any of the windows I've mentioned beforehand, press view on the top left portion of the program and make sure parameters is checked. Once that's done, click the plus icon at the bottom right, then select add 1D parameter, parenthesis 0 to 1, to create your first parameter. You can rename this to eye blink by clicking on edit properties on the gear icon of said parameter to better organize and remember what parameter would do. Then click on the circle icon. Things will change on your screen, but fret not. Move the red circle of the parameter slider to the very right, then select one eye in the node section. Scale it down using this icon at the bottom left corner, looking like it blinked. Then do the same thing with the other eye. Again, make sure you are doing this while the red circle of the parameter slider is situated at the very right. Once that's done, click on the red button underneath the gear icon. Then watch as your model blink whenever you move the slider left and right. What it basically made back there was a keyframe. By default, adding 1D parameters means that created 2 keyframes. We did not do anything with the first keyframe by moving the slider to the very right, meaning that the first keyframe is just the eyes wide open. If we add that to the changes we did on the second keyframe, what the program just did was fill in the in-betweens, and now the model blinks. Cool! You can use 1D parameters also to make your mouth open and close and other simple movements. Parameters are what we will be using to make our model move. So how do we get a model to sway its hips or rotate its head? This is where 2D parameters are introduced. Based on how it looks, we now have 9 access points to worry about, but really you just need to worry about 4 of them: the left, right, top, and bottom ones. Based on experience, I barely had to change the corner frames, and the middle keyframe is just what the model already looks like by default. This is where the multiple hidden layers you drew from before will start to make sense. You're going to be hiding layers underneath others, scaling them around, and questioning whether you fucked up the proportions or not. It is a good thing though that I had 3D references to back me up. I can't stress enough how the result of my work in Blender really helped me go through all the uncanny valleys of angling a character correctly. Speaking of deforming meshes, let's talk about editing the mesh of your layers. A lot of tutorials seem to emphasize the need for you to remesh all nodes in your project, but in my own experience, you only need to remesh them when you're already adjusting your parameters, and you need to move a smidge part of a layer out of view. To edit layers, you just need to click on this edit mesh icon at the bottom left, click on this triangular icon that says triangulate vertices, then double click around to place and move vertices around. If you ever used a 3D modeling program, it's kind of like doing retopology in Blender, but if you're a noob at that, just add vertices around the mesh, but keep it as few as possible because it's easier to manipulate big parts of a mesh with the least amount of vertices. But if you only need to move the smallest of details, then sure, go hog wild on placing dots all over your mesh. Just don't get scared when the mesh starts wiggling around like crazy. The same happened to me while I was editing the hair of my character, And after multiple attempts, I just gave up and prayed to God no one notices that minute error. While I was making this character, I also noticed that you can add access points to your parameter to make little adjustments in between crucial access points. Going back to the gear icon of your parameter, you can click Add Access Points. Then you can input a number along the X or Y section of your interface here to place a keyframe on said spot. It's crucial for things like the hair of my character, which really likes to stick its business on angles that have nothing to do with it. Dang, hair really is a problem for 2D riggers the same way normal artists have for hands, isn't it? You can add more parameters to your scene like facial expressions if you have some assets you want to show off on stream, but as far as my knowledge is concerned, manual toggles are not a thing in Inochi session, meaning that you can't change facial expressions or do shit that doesn't require tracking information like poses. So for my model, I just made 3 parameters, one for the eyes blinking, one for the mouth opening, and one for the complex 360 head and upper body rotation that my character needs to move around. When your parameters are already set, be sure to save a file in case you need to go back to this, and export it as an Inochi puppet via the file drop down on the upper left corner of the program. I'm gonna call this step, fuck it, just type down some damn numbers, because there are some things I had to set up that I can't really give a full explanation as to how it really works. Like this next thing we need to do. Download a face tracking software. Before I made this recent 2D avatar, I was using something called OpenC Face Tracker. After researching on this app, I realized that it's made by the same minds behind VC Face, the app I use to portray my 3D model live. But this thing is much more primitive in design. I mean, just look at what happens when I open the app. What the hell is happening? Oh, and if random texts are not generating on the terminal, guess what? You broke it. Nah, but really, it just means that your webcam is disconnected. But imagine my confusion when shit wasn't working correctly, only to realize that I just need to plug back the webcam onto a USB port. It's terrifying, and I thought I installed a virus on my computer. Anyway, I knew that if I was going to make a tutorial, I knew that only computer nerds would be the only major demographic that would watch this video until the very end, if this is one of the softwares that we will use. So, I found a more approachable tracking software that we can use for this project, and that is puppetstring. Oh, and look at this UI. So modern. I can actually read the text in here. You can also see God, and instructions on how to set this up in Inochi specifically. Thank God. You move on to Inochi session, import your Inochi puppet into the program via the file drop down on the top left. Then when you're finished, you need to connect a tracking software, like puppetstring, to Inochi. I'm just going to repeat the instructions here in puppetstring, but in case you can't read, click on virtual space at the top, then add virtual space. Now copy the following settings here. Why is the setting the way it is? I don't know, this is the fuck it, just type some damn numbers section of the video. When you set it up, press refresh on the top left, and see a bunch of information change at the right side of your screen. Congrats! You're almost there. It's now time to link the parameters to the information being gathered by your tracking software. This is where naming your parameters beforehand will benefit you in the long run, because if you do not name them, you'd be confused as to what the heck some of these do without checking back on Inochi Creator to see what param number 1 does. But back to Inochi session, you need to first click on the drop down and select what body part should the parameter track. I feel like this is just common sense. For a parameter in charge of blinking your eyes, it's best to select either eye blink right or eye blink left, while a parameter in charge of opening the mouth should be set to mouth open. But then you get to the parameter or parameters in charge of moving your head and waist. For some reason, 2D parameters in Creator generates 2 different parameters with the same name in session. But after wondering what the fuck this is, I just realized that one parameter represents the movement you make along the x-axis, aka your left and right movements, while the other represents the y-axis, aka your up and down head movements. But you may notice one problem with your avatar after doing these steps. It's all matching my movements, but it feels stiff or not falling through all the way when I move something like my head swaying to the left or right. Well, this is where we need to talk about the other options that appeared. The damping factor, the tracking in range, and the tracking out range. Damping is in charge of the smoothness of your character's movements. Increasing this number will result in smooth movements. That's easy to understand. But then let's talk about tracking in. The tracking in range is in charge of telling the software what range of numbers being tracked by puppetstring should it consider. And to explain this further, we need to know how to read the information on the right hand side of the screen. Now, I know this may scare the shit out of you, but listen carefully. Let's say you want to fix the parameter in charge of swaying your head left and right. Before you read anything on the right hand side, I want you to move your head left and right in front of your webcam. Assuming that puppetstring is working on the background, you will start to see numbers change rapidly, especially in the part that says head left right equals. And you notice that as you move your head left and right, one of these numbers are changing in sync with the rotation of your head. This is the number you should focus on. Now, move your head to the very right side, or at least to a degree that you would when you normally stream. Then see what number pops out. Round it off to the nearest tenths, then input your result on the right hand space of tracking in. Then rotate your head to the left. Record the number you see, round it off to the nearest tenths, then input that on the left hand space of tracking in. Now watch as your model move in sync with your movement. Based on that example, you already understand what this information means. The words on the left hand side are the body parts that it's tracking, while the numbers on the right are its present coordinates that's being taken by your own camera. By typing a number in the tracking in, you're telling the software, alright, when these coordinates reach this number, I want the model to be looking at the very right or the very left. If these coordinates go in between the tracking in range, it either means I am looking straight at the camera or looking slightly to the left or right, depending on how close the number is to a limit I typed in. Do not track anything else beyond this number range. Just assume I'm looking at the very right or left when these values go beyond what's labeled here in Inochi's session. You can use this method I told you to troubleshoot movement syncing issues between you IRL and the avatar on other parameters like the eye blink and the mouth opening, although these two are to be troubleshooted differently. Again, if things do not look smooth enough, increase a damping factor to make it smooth. Lastly, there is tracking out. Tracking out basically limits your avatar from moving to a certain extreme. So if your character facing the right direction looks weird to you, you can decrease the right hand value to a place wherein things don't look disproportionate. I'll not really get into this last option because you usually don't need to change this unless you're bad at making access points back in Creator. So leave this at the default setting for the most part. Once you're done, save the changes that you have made and you're done. Use this avatar for your live streams and go hog wild. I will leave links to the tutorials that helped me make this tutorial, as well as the time-lapse I made to make the 3D references I used in the first place, as well as the art of making 3D VTubers in case you guys want to know how to get started in making 3D models for streams. I will also leave a Google Drive link for the original .craw file, .inks file, and .int file that I used for this project in case you want to see how everything was set up in more detail. And a VOD playlist of me making this live on my two separate YouTube channels. If this journey of making 2D Vtuber avatars have taught me anything, is that if you guys take the time to actually learn something, you may be able to get your shit off the ground and actually be a VTuber for once. My main takeaway here? Don't sign your life away for a sinking yacht. I mean, what the fuck was that dumpster fire? Holy shit. Those motherfuckers. Those assholes. What the hell were they thinking? And they're still taking L's. How the fuck are they still taking L's? You just flipped the finger to every person on the right and went fuck you. And now months have passed and I still can't scroll for YouTube without some of their bullshit on the use. It first started with someone kicking a person's cat vase, then this psycho came in starting a fight with anyone with a high color value, and then the freaking Messiah came back to tell us about what the hell is really going on behind the scenes, and now the person who plays a criminal now turns out to be a criminal IRL? I mean, I didn't believe in religion until they brought hell in this world. Shit. Fuck. Then these new guys came in even after all of that, and I'm like, sisters, why? Anyway, that's it for now, guys. Not those guys that I just talked about. Now, go read a book.